start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is Out of Bounds, two guys talking sports and astrology. You're listening to Wayne Moody and Mark Lerner.
We are now having part 2 of podcast 107. It's still Sunday, December 4th, 2022. Neptune is still not moving. And this is Out of Bounds, two guys talking sports and astrology. Wayne Moody and myself, Mark Lerner. This is part 2 of the astrology of the USA and the world, November 20, 2022 to January 2023. Wayne, take it away.
Mark, most of the world has soccer fever right now. Excuse me, football. Foosball. Most of the world is afflicted with foosball fever right about now. So I think we should bend a knee and homage and look at the game and look at the news that's coming from the game. For those who haven't received the news yet, the United States has been eliminated, but they put on a good show. And some interesting developments. First, it's been there have been lots of spoilers. The Germans are out. Spain is out. You know, the favorites have not fared well at this FIFA spectacular that's happening in the Persian Gulf. But the one I want to deal with a human interest story here that I think everybody would agree, and that is Pele, the legendary Pele from Brazil. He is currently in palliative care. They say he's been removed to a hospital and he's no longer responding to chemotherapy, and he's having a battle against bowel cancer. Well, Pele in the news this week and in the week leading up to the FIFA because of his support of a player on the U.S. team who he personally congratulated for scoring a goal. Mm-hmm. But what is fascinating about Pele for me, Mark, and again, I'm walking this slow because it's so amazing given what we've just talked about, presidents connected to national charts and on and on and on, and events that are happening under this sky that have direct a connection to the horoscope of the principles that we just discussed, whether it be Roosevelt or the 45th president or the United States or Jules Verne. But as I'm looking at Pele's horoscope set for October 21st, 1940, and it's an AA Rodden rated chart. Again, Lois Rodden had a system for making sure that accurate charts were being used by the astrological community. And, Pele's chart has the highest rating. So that means we're supposed to be able to trust the ascendant degree in this chart. Well, Pele, 1940, was born at the time of the United States Neptune return. And in that chart, in his chart, Neptune's at 26 Virgo. His moon in this AA-rated chart is at 22 Gemini. So there's that 21, 22 Gemini button being pushed again. And here is that 20-plus degree of Virgo Pisces being pushed again by the transits that are in the sky right now. Now, where Pele achieved his fame and fortune was as an athlete in sports. And again, most of the world considers football to be a soccer. What we call soccer, they call football, and it is the premier sport. You know, if baseball is the American sport, well, then soccer, football, is the sport of the international community, which is why you have a FIFA inviting all those teams to the Persian Gulf in this big extravaganza. So, Mark, one more thing. I looked at his progress chart. Again, he's ailing. He's not responding to chemotherapy. He has cancer of the bowels. And those of you who are familiar with family members, loved ones having cancer, you know that in the bowels, if it is untreatable, it is terminal. Well, in his progressed horoscope set for today, he has his moon at 25 degrees of Gemini. So he has recently had a progressed lunar return.
Well, okay, let me bring that up. The moon has, in progressions, just like the moon has a 27 and a third day transiting cycle. That's that's why I always like to bring up. And, you know, I welcome people also back on greatbearenterprise.com, my website, where we have GPS astrology. You can read that. And we also have our astrology shop and all these astrology reports, which come to you at PDF within like 2 days. We've got 17 different kinds of reports, so you can get into your progressions, your transits. One is called Timeline, another is called Skylog. We have these specials right now, Energize Your Life, Numerology, and Skylog, and another report reduced like enormously, like $90 instead of $150, and another thing called Get Into Your Progressions. And we have a timeline report that was designed by Michael Erlewine, a great astrologer who we both know very well from Michigan, where all these computerized reports came from. And there's a timeline report that can do different kind of progressions, as well as what are called solar arc prediction report, and another one called life progressions. So what Wayne just said, and this is significant for Pele, and I want to broaden this for every person, whether you know somebody or yourself are at that age, because 82 is his age now, Pele's age approximately, or in that time period of 81 to 82. Okay, so if what happens is the moon has a cycle of 27 and a third days by transit. By progression, it's 27 and a third years. Multiply 3 times 27, you get 81. Okay, 81 to 82 actually. So when you're 82, this is what happens for every person. Neptune goes opposite its own position. So we're back to the original theme that you brought up today with the Constitution or the statements by the former president. Neptune's not moving. We know that Neptune, when it's positive, is inspiration and idealism and universal love, or it could be things like communism and socialism, these mass giant movements of energy. Very different than Uranus, which is more of the planet of unique individuality, of which the United States represents, whether it's capitalism, the individual, and that's the foundation of our country. You know, we've talked about this a lot. We'll always keep talking about it. Uranus discovered 1781 in March, and then we win the Revolutionary War in October over Cornwallis, and Uranus and the United States get to start as a revolutionary country, by the way, of the individual rising up against tyranny, a king or whoever is in royalty. And then, whereas Neptune discovered 1846, we get the socialist revolutions, we get the gold rush, and eventually communism comes up in Russia in 1917, a year when Saturn and Neptune are back together as they were when Neptune was discovered in 1846. So Neptune has a lot to do with spirituality, with universality, with soul and love and creativity, imagination, psychic sensitivity. But when it's negative, it can represent dissolution. Now, what happens when everybody is 82? So, Wayne, you just brought up, everybody gets a progressed moon. If you get to live that long, before you even get a Saturn return and the so-called identity crisis, which is about age 29, 28 and a half, 29, 30, who am I, where am I going, what does my life mean? You get something else. You get your progressed moon coming back when everybody is 27 and a third years old, when you're 54 and a half, and when you're 81 to 82. So Pele is having that moon, which is in Gemini for him, coming back, and it just happens to connect up with this Mars retrograde transiting cycle, as you brought up, Wayne, returning 3 times for the U.S. over a couple months, and it's currently there as he's in the news, as Mars just triggered, this spot in his chart, and suddenly, since we know Mars is also sports and the FIFA World Cup, suddenly Pele is being reported ailing and can no longer do chemotherapy. As a personal thing, my dad, when he turned 82, and I won't go into all of it, but a very terrible thing happened, and he had been a doctor, and he wound up not due to diabetes, but he lost part of a leg, and it was due to a whole very Neptunian, confusing kind of thing in the medical establishment. And I could talk a lot about deception and illusions and confusion in the medical establishment. Not that happens all the time, but at certain points, you see, when people are a certain age, and if Neptune is very strong, as it is like when we're 40 to 41, and we have the so-called midlife crisis, then anyone, if you're out there, if you're 40 to 41, you're having Neptune square its own position. That's a crisis point. If you get to live to be 82, you get Neptune opposite its own position. And one more point, when everybody is 83 and 3/4, you get Uranus coming back. So I'm glad you added this. 3 gigantic cycles, and if we're fortunate to get to 81, 82, 83, 84, the challenge is you get a Neptune opposite its own position, just like the America's having right now as a country. You get that personally, or your loved one who's older or whatever, and you get Uranus coming back, which has an 83 and 3/4 cycle. So both those outer planets and their meanings are gigantically significant for any person. In this case, it's Pele as a sports legend. And he's not playing. All these people are playing, and everybody's wondering who's going to win, who's going to do that, what about the politics, all these different issues in Dubai. Meanwhile, as Brother Wayne just brought up, let's remember this particularly amazing player from Brazil.
Mark,
for all of these years, who's now ill and may pass away. Let's hope he doesn't and recovers, but he's in the middle of a crisis time. Go ahead.
Pele is considered to be the athlete of the century.
Right. Amazing.
And this is, you continue, I just want to add this.
No, that's great.
Messi just scored his 1,000th goal.
Right.
Pele, 1,200 of them. I think the fact that this synchronicity is happening at the FIFA World Cup in the Persian Gulf, with Messi having this success and Pele in a dignified way going out.
Well, let me bring up something here, and I want to go into other sports things that are political in an odd, not political, but are astrological. So you brought up something really interesting. When the FIFA, I'm not that tuned into, although as many of you know, I lived in Scotland in Findhorn for a number of years after being at lucistrust.org. Again, everybody, lucistrust.org. Tibetan Master DK, Alice Bailey. I worked there right next to the United Nations for several years in the 70s, was fortunate enough to go to Findhorn in Scotland, this amazing community. No gurus. It's still in existence, just had the 60th anniversary. And all that led me and Wayne to be part of Welcome to Planet Earth, Mundane Earth Astrology, that I was fortunate enough to publish on Earth Astrology and World Leaders and so on. And, Wayne and I have picked up the pace here. That ended after 20 years in the year 2001. I've still been doing the astrology cosmic calendar, by the way, which was the centerpiece of the daily cycles, moon, sun, eclipses, new moon, and so on. So don't forget, everybody, to again, put a little ad in there. Astrology Cosmic Calendar with a K app for iPhones and Android phones, free, one day at a time. You got to do that for your phone if you can do it, or subscribe for pennies a day so you can go into the future. Right now, we have all the entries to December 31. It's only December 4th. And if you decide to subscribe for a year, 6 months, or 1 month, it's different rates. And by the way, if you do a year, everybody, you get a complimentary timeline report on your progression for 6 months. Normally sells for like $35, $40. It's free. That's if you subscribe. So anyway, back to where we're at here. The Lionel Messi, here's what I wanted to say. He's from Argentina. He's 35, okay? He's much younger. And now he is being, the question of his life, and I don't have the chart in front of me, but I sent it to you, Wayne, because he has another AA rating. It's interesting, these two legends, one being young and one being older, both have these exact charts. And I noticed the one thing I do remember is that Lionel Messi has had a lot of challenges because he played for other teams. So there are these issues about his home country of Argentina versus some of the teams, right? And we have all these people, Ronaldo, these different people. I just saw that France beat whoever they beat today, and it said Olivier someone has more goals than for France than some previous person in the history of of either the World Cup or whatever. Now, I'm not an aficionado of all this. Not that I don't know football or soccer and how it's played. I'm aware of all that. I've got family, a young granddaughter who plays this as well, and I've played it. Here and there. But my fortes or interests are baseball, football, basketball, hockey, tennis, track and field, whatever it is. More so, and I'm not that much into that area. However, these people are paid millions and millions of dollars. As Wayne just said, Pele, and I followed his career earlier. Part of the reason I like these people is I'm born on the 10th of the month. Pele was number 10, and so is Messi. Now, why they're number 10, I don't know. Those are the numbers they like on their uniform. And maybe there's a reason for those numbers. But it gets back to this other thing. Lionel Messi, what I wanted to say here is, and you brought it up, over in the Persian Gulf, and Wayne can share more about this, and we've already, this is a big thing in his studies as well as Welcome Planet Earth. Pluto coming back for the first time ever for the United States in a 247-year cycle. And Wayne is the one who focused on this in 1987 in our magazine. That I remember I called it the Twilight Zone, and we put it on the cover, and he has a facsimile of this in your book, The War Impulse Pattern, of that showing that Pluto is overhead if you move and relocate the U.S. chart from 1776 July 4th, with the time that we've been using, like late afternoon, 4:47 in the afternoon, and you get Pluto is overhead through the whole Persian Gulf. So, folks, when we have the first ever Pluto return 3 times, with one more time at the end of this year, right when Venus and Pluto come together, Mercury goes retrograde, the last couple of days of the year, Pluto is once again exactly back. And look, we could go on this forever. Iran giving drones to Russia for the war against Ukraine, the whole issue of the nuclear thing. I think I sent you an article we haven't talked about today, that the right wing in Israel, with Netanyahu coming back into power, the only way, and he's been the kind of Donald Trump in the last couple of years, he's still being accused of different crimes over there, and he has become, or is in the process of becoming prime minister again, and he can only do this with the help of an extreme right-wing other figure in their parliament, right? And there's fears that the article was that we could have a theocracy. This was the idea in Israel, just like in Iran, but through Judaism rather than Islam. Wouldn't that be extreme? And we have, I've said this to you before, whether it's watching the movie like The Sum of All Fears. Look, right now, I've studied this more than any other chart except for the JFK assassination, my research on nuclear energy and atomic energy, the first chain reaction in Chicago, December 2nd, 1942, which is now the 80th anniversary. We have all these nuclear hotspots, okay? And Wayne and I have been talking about this and writing about it as well as our other astrologers for decades now. And we just had the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the 59th anniversary, unfortunately, of the President Kennedy's death. And he was connected very much to the United States, Uranus, and planets like Neptune and Pluto coming together in the 1890s. This is all connected to the rise of nuclear energy in all my research. It's in the area of 7 to 11 of Sagittarius and Gemini, and I did all the research. And back in June of 2021, I read my whole nuclear article. So that's one of the podcasts in Astroscope. It's about the Geneva Summit. So if you want to go back and you see this thing about the Geneva Summit, I literally read my whole original nuclear axis in that podcast. The challenge that I see, Brother Wayne, and, obviously that we could talk hours about this. We get these alarming things from Kim Jong-un in North Korea, right? Missiles over the Sea of Japan. We've got Putin and his acolytes there threatening nuclear this and that. We've got the whole thing with Xi and Taiwan. We've got NATO. Okay, we've got all these historical things, and the fact that we exploded the first atomic weapons over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we go back and forth all these different places. France is a nuclear power. They have issues with their nuclear power plants. The United Kingdom is a nuclear power. India and Pakistan are always on the edge. But what I get to worry about probably more, this is just me, and it's not because I was born Jewish, because I don't necessarily support Israel as even an independent country, and that's kind of crazy to say, but that has to do with spiritual things and like what's happening with Jewish people over the course of centuries and establishing the state of Israel right in the heart of this Persian Gulf. But we are in a dangerous point with Israel and Iran and that whole area. We know we have problems with Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and Wayne knows this more than anybody else, and I'll turn it over to you so that we can, talk about this for, 5 or 10 minutes or whatever in your opinions. Pluto has come back, and therefore it's overhead through the entire Persian Gulf, not just a little thin line, but kind of the whole area being inflamed. And Pluto is the god of the underworld, death and rebirth, transformation. Pluto was discovered in Flagstaff, Arizona. That's our thing. Okay, Uranus was discovered in England. Neptune was discovered in Berlin in Germany. We have Pluto from Flagstaff, Arizona. And so plutonium, uranium energies, 1930. Well, by 1945, 15 years later, we're suddenly a nuclear power, an atomic power, just 15 years after Pluto's discovered. So why don't you take it away for a few minutes there? I mean, whatever you feel. One other point is, this is the last point. This is really important. I have said to Wayne, and I've shared this in podcasts, my belief system is not just to look at an exact return, but to realize we had one February 20th. Pluto came back, the first part of the wave of this year. 4 days later, the Ukraine war. The next one was like July 10th. The last one is going to be right after Mercury goes retrograde on December 29th. It's going to happen literally that day and the day after Pluto comes back again to exactly discovery point, then conjunct Venus. For the fifth time in the last 2 years, the planet of love, the planet of understanding, the planet of friendship, of potential goodwill and creative artistry. It's kind of, I want to say, are you kidding me? Who is designing all this so that humanity is tested? Last point, and then back to you. In the fall, a year from now, when Pluto goes through, by the way, Pluto's going to enter zero Aquarius, another whole thing. That's going to happen, I think it's March 24th. And Pluto will just go into like 1 degree of Aquarius, which is where Jupiter and Saturn conjuncted 2 years ago, starting a whole new cycle of Jupiter-Saturn 20-year cycles, and where every future president of the United States every 4 years takes the oath of office when the sun is at 1 of Aquarius. So now we've got Pluto moving out of Capricorn, going into Aquarius, but it will come back a year from now within 1/3 of a degree of its discovery position. My point is we are not out of this Pluto return cycle just because we make 3 exact returns this year. A year from now, if we as a country and a world don't get our acts together, if we don't find a way to create some kind of peace and understanding, we're going to be under that plutonic shadow, for at least another year, if not longer. So we have an opportunity to change things. Back to you.
Mark, the manifestations that have occurred just in the last 48 hours with respect to the United States Pluto and events in the Persian Gulf have been significant. In Palmdale, California, there was an unveiling of the recent, most sophisticated stealth bomber ever made in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Called the B-21 Raider. It's amazing for me that we call them these missiles, these Predator drones and Hellfire missiles and Raiders. I guess if you're in the military, you got to have that kind of a title or name to it.
Yeah.
But it's awfully curious that they get these names and they're euphemisms, like the Lost Raiders, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, or something like that. It's not funny because these are death-dealing, destruction-dealing instruments of war.
Right.
Well, the reason I bring up the B-21 Raider is for this following reason. Over 2022, throughout the summer, we've been hearing in the news, they've been reporting it, that the B-52s or B-1 bombers have made a flyover of the Persian Gulf. It's a show of power. It's a show of power. Whenever there is an issue and we want to, like, it's like they say certain animals swell up to a larger size and do a demonstration to frighten you off before they actually do physical violence, that the biggest animals don't actually start fighting one another unless it's a last resort because they are capable of inflicting such horrific damage. Well, we've been saying to people in the Persian Gulf who are our adversaries and who might be considering something, hey, do you have one of these? And then we fly them over their country.
Right.
So now we have the latest and the greatest dealing instrument of destruction. And this is an instrument of mass destruction because the B-21 Raider carries nuclear devices. It's supposed to get under any country's defenses and fly. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to bring up the moon.
That's one thing, Mark. Just the other day, in the last 24 hours, the European Union, NATO, and Western countries decided that they would put a $60 cap on the Russian oil. Oil originating from Russia. Yeah. And so what that is designed to do is, in this country, when through no effort on their own, companies reap mass benefits because of inflation driving up costs and all that, and we keep talking about a tax on those. I'm not going to say ill-gotten gains, but it wasn't through any effort on their part. It was just basically collateral damage to society that they ended up getting richer. So they don't want the Russians to fund their military campaign in the Ukraine. I figure this is a good idea for putting a stop to that. Well, that's well and good that you have unanimity amongst the Western countries, but OPEC immediately put a kibosh on that. And this morning, news, the OPEC said, we are not going to agree with that.
So you get Neptune and Pluto are very connected with oil.
There you go.
Let me add something, because you brought up something that you didn't realize. This is a surprise for you, but because Wayne and I are rather intuitive, brothers of the soul, brothers of astrology, we found out ever since we've had these private recordings before we invented Out of Bounds. It's like, I worked for an organization called ABC in New York City. I remember we had this conversation at one point, maybe a year ago or something. And then Wayne stops me and says, wait a minute, Mark, wait a minute. Did you just say ABC? I said, yeah, why? I worked for ABC in New England. It was like the same organization. This is way before we even knew each other. And like we've been doing this thing, our fathers, different, family members born on particular days. Anyway, you're not going to believe this. I was so happy when a moment ago, even though this is not funny, you brought up Raiders, and then you said, because the name, with this missile and stuff. And what you didn't realize was that last night, as I was watching a news program, and I had to record it because I had been an aficionado of Raiders of the Lost Ark and the whole series, okay? I didn't like the second one where they're ripping somebody's heart out. I didn't like that Steven Spielberg thing. But the Spielberg-George Lucas connection, going back to Star Wars in 1977 when Chiron is discovered. I mean, I've made this whole study in Welcome to Planet Earth. I've made it on my podcast. There's 3 whole podcasts on George Lucas and Star Wars, The Secret of Star Wars. And the connection of these two people, in the way they've done stuff with John Williams as the composer and everything else. At any rate, that third one of Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail, the first one, is on the Lost Ark. And because of George Lucas's chart, he's younger than Spielberg, born May 14th, 1944. Spielberg is born December 18, 1946. Spielberg's born with the sun in Sagittarius at the galactic center, which we won't get into all of it, but late Sagittarius is the center of our Milky Way. We just got to sort of see through infrared, unbelievable telescope, what it looks like sort of at the center of the galaxy, 26,000 light years away. The black hole with different thousands of stars circling around. Well, Spielberg has his sun at that point. By the way, I will mention, unfortunately, Vladimir Putin, who has his Mars right at this point. Almost every time Wayne and I and other astrologers who have done this for a long time, we look at world leaders, we look at constitutions, we look at national charts, we look at Saturn and Neptune conjunctions, one of which will come up in 4 years, by the way, at the beginning of the zodiac, and all these different figures, like Lincoln born with Saturn conjunct Neptune, John F. Kennedy, Saturn, Neptune, Neptune discovered, Saturn conjunct Neptune, Garfield dies 20 years after Lincoln and has also during a Saturn-Neptune transit in the sky. Stalin dies in March of 1953 with Saturn and Neptune again, and Putin and Xi born 8 months apart from October 52 to June of 53. These two incredibly important world leaders both have Saturn conjunct Neptune. And then we get a cycle when George Bush #1 is president, where the Voyager 2 mission in the summer, and I did this whole article just before it happened about our going to pass by Neptune, take pictures, and then we take pictures of Neptune, which again has a lot to do with social and communism, and the Berlin Wall falls in November of 1989, and that leads to the end of communism, at least temporarily, under in 1991 under Gorbachev, and shifting over to Yeltsin on Christmas Day of 1991. And now we're going to have another Saturn-Neptune conjunction in February of 2026 that Brother Wayne and I are studying, and so many other astrologers. What will that bring to 1 degree of Aries, the first degree of the entire zodiac? And this is nothing to be, it's something to be concerned about. I mean, maybe not worried, but at least aware of and concerned about, because we still have, Xi is relatively new on the scene of 7 years, 6 years, another 6 years, right, in power. Putin's been in power for 22 years. And he's just been so, connected to all of these things. So we've got these gigantic concerns. Back to the whole thing of Israel and Iran. The thing I want to say, and I'd like to have your opinion on this, what upsets me in my being at Michigan State, when I was in school there, and I was fortunate to stuff my writing career and was a columnist there, and it was wonderful, that I had this opportunity to write about politics during the Nixon administration, 1968, when Martin Luther King was murdered and Robert Kennedy was murdered, and we had all of these changes, student revolts, and so on. It's then I was discovering so much after the Kennedy assassination about the secrets of what is going on, at least what we all know. We still don't know all the details or many of the details about what happened with John F. Kennedy. We still don't know. And Brother Wayne, you got all this information about Cuban Missile Crisis and what decisions were made that many people don't know about, and you have to do a lot of research. And the thing that worries me most, like we know that Iran apparently, they keep saying, well, we don't only want to do this nuclear technology for this or that. We don't want to have a bomb, whatever. Israel has never admitted that they're a nuclear power, ever. Ever. They've never said it. I mean, why can't they say it? Okay? I mean, we all know that it's true. Okay? Are we going to deny that we have nuclear energy? Of course not. You just talked about these missiles. You know, Russia has, they keep talking about the thousands of missiles, you know, that they have, the tens of thousands and all these different things. I'm worried, just like in The Sum of All Fears, that movie that came out in 2002, based on the Tom Clancy novel, and Wayne and I share a lot about 13 Days, the great movie about that Robert Kennedy from his book for the Cuban Missile Crisis, and The Sum of All Fears by Tom Clancy that came out. The book was written before that, but it came out as a movie in 2002 at a very significant time. In particularly The Sum of All Fears, the issue is that a nuclear bomb or missile falls accidentally from a plane that crashes and lands somewhere in the Middle East. And in the storyline, which is then not completely followed, they changed the Tom Clancy story to using an Austrian official. Alan Bates is the actor who actually I did a reading for back in 1974, the great British actor of so many different movies, Women in Love, and just on and on. Fantastic actor, the King of Hearts about World War I, and an insane asylum. One of the great things, if you've never seen the King of Hearts with Alan Bates, and he was great in theater. Anyway, he plays a sort of modern day Hitlerian Austrian figure. This is going to ruin it for everybody, I guess, who makes Russia and the United States sort of go at one another by using nuclear technology against us. This is the Tom Clancy idea. Now, in the book, actually, it's all a Middle Eastern plot, but because of 9/11 happening in 2001, they changed the movie script. You see, that they didn't want to inflame Islamic tensions in America and around the world by staying exactly to the Tom Clancy story. The reason I'm going on about this is my concern is that we keep worrying about places. There's all these nuclear hotspots that Wayne is very much has his finger on the pulse with the U.S. chart. The one that I think is most worrying to me is in the Middle East. And that's because the Israeli politics, and you can comment on this, what's happening in Iran now, from their new chart, there's two different versions, 1979, one in February, one in April. I don't want to get into the dispute about that or the difference. One is a sort of revolutionary chart. Another one is the Republic of Iran. This is Persia being reborn in 1979, and countries often go through rebirths. We have not. We're the new kid on the block, 1776. We have not had a death and rebirth of and I hope that doesn't happen, although it could. But Russia, China, Iran, all these countries, Turkey, and on, they have multiple charts. It's like people, I believe, reincarnate, countries reincarnate, okay? And this keeps, us guessing a whole lot, which is the right chart. My concern is with these leaders, right? Who's in charge in Iran who are doing such devastating things, whether it's against the Iranian players at FIFA, right? Or the women regarding their dress and the different codes. And hundreds and thousands of people, we don't know the totals, are being imprisoned and or killed in Iran. And all these countries, I feel, when I look at the politics, I don't know if you agree with me or not. When I look at Russia's chart or Putin's chart and Xi's chart and China's chart and the charts we have for Iran, and there is an exact Israeli chart from May 14th of 1948, and Harry Truman was the first war leader, it was 13 or 11 minutes after Israel declared itself a state. We were the ones who said, we recognize you. And then the rest of the countries did or did not. And there was war there over and over again, 48, 56, the 6-Day War and on. And these are actual wars. The Korean War ended without, an agreement in 1953. And we've got all our soldiers there still on the line. 30 plus thousand, that are right there. And that seems like, oh yeah, anything could happen any moment. And that's true. India and Pakistan, any moment. Russia, China, stuff that we have. But to me, the greatest concern I have, maybe because Pluto's come back, is the Persian Gulf. Back to you.
I agree. And almost as though to illustrate that, I have a story here about one of those flyovers. And the point is made that the flyover was this was an early one in 2022 on April the 4th, and the headline is the United States Air Force B-52. That's the oldest bomber that we have. When you think Strategic Command, or when you think Minot Air Base, and planes flying and being refueled in the air 24/7, that's the B-52. It's the workhorse of the United States Air Force. It carries nuclear bombs, and it says here that a B-52 flies with F-22s and 9 other nations over the Middle East, a bomber task force mission. So, what's the mission? And it's a B-52 that was assigned to Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. Flew over the East Mediterranean, over the Arabian Peninsula, Red Sea, off in the United Kingdom, and then they crossed over that whole region. Now, here's the thing. The United States Central Command, especially, and of late, how active it is, but I know it was entirely relevant during the Iraq War and during the Afghanistan War. It was headquartered in Bahrain, and it was headquartered in Doha, which no. The Doha is in Qatar. It was headquartered in Bahrain, and the longitude line there is 51 degrees east. Well, that's the Pluto midheaven. 50 east, 51 east is the Pluto midheaven. So the United States Central Command for decades now has been headquartered under the United States Pluto midheaven as the Pluto return was occurring. So for me, that's very significant. What that's all about war. The United States Command moved from Florida to the Persian Gulf in order to be in closer proximity to where the war was going on. And one more thing to add. We just heard in the last 48 hours, 24 hours, that Iran has considered, it leaked or an announcement was made, that they're getting rid of their morality police. Well, you think of what Pluto means, and you think of spies and torture chambers and bad things happening to people being retentions off the street and dark, shady deals or CIA coups and all the rest. That's the morality police. And for them for it to be a public thing that they're talking about, they're going to get rid of this very visible, conspicuous issue that has caused the people to rebel against them, just like the people in China have rebelled against the lockdowns for the COVID. You have a very significant development happening in the last 24 hours. Go ahead, Mark. I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, well, there's a couple of things to bring up. Israel is a Sun and Taurus country, May 1448. Uranus is currently in Taurus. So to bring up back to the Israel versus Iran, argument, difficulty. Of course, we got Saudi Arabia versus Yemen, because Saudi Arabia is usually considered our ally. If you remember Donald Trump going overseas to the sword dance there, and the connection between the Saudi leaders and the Bush family. Again, I'm not branding it negative. It's just that for whatever reason, we are allied with Saudi Arabia, and there are many reasons. Oil, but also they are the opponent to Iran, because Iran is a theocracy. Now, meaning that their religion is in charge of their government since 1979. So a couple of really important points. Iran is going through a midlife crisis. Now, Iran is Persia for thousands of years. Iran was never Iran. Okay, that is a modern name. Iraq was never Iraq. Okay, we're talking about Babylonia. This gets back to something that Putin said today, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but again, remember Putin, October of 1952, Saturn conjunct Neptune with Mercury, the Sun. He's got all of this Libran energy connected to the United States Saturn, which is parked at the top of our chart, not exactly where Neptune is at the midheaven, but in the 10th house in Libra. And then we've got China's chart is connected to our Saturn, because China's chart from October 1 of 49 under Mao, they have a Neptune right on our Saturn. And then we've got Xi, born 8 months after Putin, and both of these world leaders are Saturn-Neptune conjunct people that are connected to the discovery of Neptune. Now, all these outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Brother Wayne was just talking about Pluto, all of these are being simultaneously activated. Here's why, again, as a reminder. Pluto has come back to the U.S. 3 times. The third time is coming up shortly, as I said, with Venus. Next, a year from now, Pluto is still at that spot, and Pluto, meanwhile, is going to go into early Aquarius, which is no cakewalk. So it's not as if this is ending anytime soon. Next president of the United States, assuming our Constitution stays in existence, January 20th, 2025, Republican, Democrat, whoever, is going to have Sun conjunct Pluto within 2 degrees from like 0 of Aquarius to Pluto at 2 of Aquarius. And you and I did this research. The only other time the Sun and Pluto were together goes back to when we had presidential inaugurations in Pisces on March 4th, and there was one either during the time of Lincoln or before Lincoln, I forget who it was. But one other time we had Sun conjunct Pluto during an administration in the sign Pisces in the 1800s, and that was no, bowl of cherries, let's put it that way. We have not had Sun conjunct Pluto until the next president comes into power. We've got a long way to go of 2+ years. Back to the story. So the thing is, Israel is going to have Uranus transit its Sun. Okay, I'm not making a prediction here, but they have had great instability between Netanyahu still on the ropes, being accused of all kinds of stuff, just like Donald Trump, kind of a similar thing. He's about to be prime minister again. This is sort of a process. And he's choosing the most right-wing kind of people in order to run the country. And that's what brought up this article, which I think I sent to you in the last 24 hours, and I didn't have a chance to read all of it. But it really made me worry that Israel could become a theocracy. Now, again, this is a projection. Somebody doesn't know anything about astrology or Pluto or anything. But we're watching these tea leaves. So I'm just trying to point out, this is kind of important. I've got a couple other things to throw out here before we finish this point. So Israel and Iran are at loggerheads, and they have always been this way. And Israel is our queen in the Middle East on the chessboard. But we can't control them 100% of the time. So they are the ones who destroyed that Iraqi facility. In actuality, it wasn't like what they did in Natanz, where they tinkered around with the virtual, the electronic stuff in there and set them back. That's another story of a couple of years ago, where the Iranians said something bad happened here. And I guess part of the storyline is something like the Israelis infiltrated somehow one of the persons who was going in there. Somebody went in there, or they did something remotely, and they screwed up their stuff. So everything like you're talking about, missiles, and what I think we're probably more worried about than anything else, I know I have, just like with the missile crisis from 1962, is miscommunication. Somebody getting, like some of all fears, a bomb accidentally dropped, some terrorist sells that to some other country in order to, make millions of dollars. Now it would be billions of dollars. And they don't seem to care that the planet can go up in flames. and this is why these books are written and the stories are written, and, that we get really upset because they're nefarious people who want to misuse technology and everything else. So the last thing that I forgot, this is very important. You brought up Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I forgot to tell you something from last night, and then I'll be done with this part of it. And then please tell me what you think. Last night, in the last 24 hours, the 5th edition of Raiders of the Lost Ark with Harrison Ford as an 80-plus-year-old is coming out, and they've given a definitive date, Wayne and everybody, June 30th in theaters only, because whether there's COVID or not or anything else, these movie places, these studios cannot make money if everything's on television, right? They have to get everybody seated in these theaters, whether people are masked or not. Guess what? You're not going to believe this. Normally, they would choose Memorial Day weekend, like Star Wars and all this stuff. That's usually when a lot of these movies. June 30th. So I took out my book last night as I'm watching this. They just put out, the 2-minute trailer. And here's the two things. They're now using age reduction device to make Harrison Ford, who's 80, look like he's 40 again. They're fooling around with the technology, and it's become very amazing to turn back the clock. That's a whole other issue. The date of June 30th, I open up my book. You're not going to believe this. This was on last night with Neptune not moving, right? So this is a surprise for Wayne. On Friday, June 30th of 2023, Neptune is stationary. It's not moving. And that's the point. Today, Neptune goes direct. On June 30th, it will go retrograde, and that is a day that they've pre-selected. Who did that selection? Why did they choose June 30th? Well, all I know is last night, literally, the trailer was released all around planet Earth. Okay, now you can see and get ready for this unbelievable 5th edition of, it's called Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and nobody really knows what it's all about except they show 2 minutes. So get this. When everybody is going to tune into this and go into theaters, whether masked or not, Neptune not moving at Pacific time will be like 2:07 in the afternoon, 5:07 Eastern, and the moon is changing from Scorpio to Sagittarius. There's a Sun-Mercury conjunction, which is what we would call a superior one. The Earth, the Sun and Mercury are lined up in the solar system, and the next day, there is a Mercury-Jupiter sextile of 60 degrees, which is considered favorable in general astrology, and a Sun-Jupiter sextile of 60 degrees. Somebody, whether deliberately or not, Spielberg and so on, either picked up astrological, advice or hired somebody, because this is too arbitrary of an amazing synchronicity that this would come out last night, and they give this thing June 30th, theaters only. And I happen to catch that. I mean, is that amazing or what?
I think that's amazing, but, again, what we see in our maps of reality, which unfortunately for us, we can't speak to everybody in the world about what we see because, again, a map of reality is not the reality itself, right? And how to interpret what's going on. But the astrological lens and the maps and the charts that we use are as precise and as incredible as any other tool. It doesn't surprise me, Mark, but it sounds like a setup. Harking back to 1918 when all those people in Philadelphia showed up for that parade.
Yeah, in Philadelphia and San Francisco. In Philadelphia, there were, within a week, 10,000 people dead, so many dead that they were piling them up on the street to be picked up by trucks. So, folks, we're watching the World Cup and we're watching the greatest teams on earth compete against one another. But when you look at the politics of the world and you see Russia squaring off with the United States squaring off with China, and the NATO squaring off with, communist countries. When you look at these contests that are going on,
you got to have, and we see that in the United States, our team does things diametrically opposed to the way the Chinese team does things, and each one of them are betting that their team and their strategy for winning is going to win. But when you're dealing with billions and hundreds of millions of people's lives, it's just so diabolical in my mind. Mm-hmm. So, Mark, it's like attention merchants. It's like what they call click candy on computers. It's like, everybody run out and go to the theaters because they've said you can only see it on the theaters, and go see this. I know that my 93-year-old mother went to see the latest Black Panther because that's the only way she could see it. She went to a theater. I was last week when my sister told me she took my mother. I was like, are you kidding me?
Well, like you just said, at the end of this little trailer, it was amazing to see. This is December 3rd, yesterday, Neptune not moving. And Neptune has a major rulership over television, movies, everything that has to do with the pictorial sense, our creative imagination, our psychic sensitivity, things that are often visual rather than literary, I should say, which to me is a little bit more Mercury and Uranus, if I'm thinking of,
using age modification tools, deception.
Yeah. Well, and so what surprised me most was, look, I love the Indiana Jones thing, and I would watch Harrison Ford as an 80-year-old. I don't care, But the point is, they made a big deal about the technology, which is both Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and so many other. You got to have Sun, Moon, you got to have Mercury, you got to have Venus. Every planet is part of technology on some level. But it is interesting that Mars is retrograding in Gemini, and if we think of one of the things that bothers me about the whole retrograde thing is I don't think people think about it the way that I think about it. I'm not saying they have to think about it this way. But what does reversing age mean? You see, isn't that Mars retrograde in Gemini? And that has nothing to do with modern astrology, and this is where I absolutely will never change. I don't want fear being created because people assume that retrograde motion means bad, means negative. And this is being spread around and has been developed for many, many years. And it is not something that was ever really a part of understanding how astrology worked. I'm not saying we can't find books somewhere from England or France or even 1,000 years ago when astrology was taught, or 2,000 years ago, where people were sort of like, the planet appears to be reversing itself and so on. So all of these things have developed, but because of social media and getting a smattering of astrology, having done 50 years of astrology, go to my website. I have telephone consultations. I've done thousands of readings for people, and I get a lot of people who contact me, and I'm sure this happens for you. Every so often, you got to have somebody who said, well, I've got Mercury retrograde in my chart, or I've got a retrograde here and there. I've had people come up to me, they've been depressed, for their whole lives because they have a bunch of retrogrades. I have a bunch of retrogrades. Retrogradation is normal and natural. It's part of the fact that we're in a heliocentric system. We think of Copernicus and Galileo and all these great people, and Sir Isaac Newton and Einstein and other people. Like, now we know our solar system, and we can see things between Hubble and so on. And one of the problems with astrology is we're still stuck on geocentric astrology. One of the great things that Wayne and I are doing, based on the work of Jim Lewis and other astrologers with astrocartography, what is an astrocartography map? And again, in GPS astrology, you can see there's a whole page that shows the map, it shows the lines, and Brother Wayne's work is so much on this. But what you're doing and what I do, when I do global hotspots, I'm about to do another one, that's also full moons and new moons. I always give the world map for any new moon or full moon based on Washington, D.C., and the world map is still the world map. I could do a chart for every single capital in the world. The world map doesn't change. That's the beautiful thing. What I don't think people realize, and maybe I'd like you to make a comment on this, okay? The world map for the United States chart, let's say, or any national chart or any person, it doesn't matter what your personal chart is or even how you relocate your chart where the houses are changing for you as a person. The world map based on any moment of time is permanent, is it not? You see what I'm saying? The USA birth chart for July 4th, 1776 that we talked about in a previous thing, 4:47 in the afternoon. Those lines are there, right? And it doesn't matter. We can relocate the U.S. chart as a dial of 12 houses and figure out in different places we have this rising or that. But when you look at the map, see, the map shows all that stuff as lines, and then we would have to then move the circular map, which is the geocentric version of this planetary map that we see all as one picture, is what I'm saying. Hidden within astrocartography is heliocentric astrology, that the Earth is part of the solar system. So otherwise that map would just keep changing. It doesn't. Those lines are the way they are because the Earth is where it is, and there's a certain moment of time on Earth relative to the solar system and the sun, the moon, and the planets, so that when we look at that map, we can go for reference everywhere on the map and see the U.S. lines, which is what you're doing, what you do.
Mark, at the International Meridian Conference in 1884, October 1st, 1884, in Washington, D.C., 24, again, it's called the International, and there are hundreds of countries in the world today, but there were only 30 participants, 41 delegates, and I believe only 24 of them actually voted. But they established the Greenwich Zero Line.
Right.
And what that did was created an international standard for time,
right.
And the mapping of the world is based upon that meridian and that time scheme. And so we are all born within that time scheme system, at least since 1884, for sure.
Right.
And everything else is adjusted to that. So we're all subsumed by this great decision that was made at that conference. And so, we all normalize, and we all our lives are relative to that system.
Well, okay, well, let me bring this up back. I want to reinforce this because I know that you and I are in agreement about this. So I'm just going to say it, and hopefully you'll say, yeah. Here's the deal. Hopefully I can say this. Wayne, you're not living where you were born, and neither am I. Okay, I'll just say for myself, I was born in New York City. I've lived for 38 years on the Pacific Northwest. I didn't deliberately move here. It's just the way it happened. So what I'm trying to say is this, and Wayne and I did this the other day. For the first time ever, from 1982, it's now 40 years of doing nuclear research, I never relocated my chart to Hiroshima, where we dropped the first nuclear bomb, okay? And I found, I'm not going to give all the details, it would take too much time, but I'm born when Uranus is not moving, and all of these Uranian energies I had already studied about that first dropping of the bomb. Uranus happened to be exactly overhead. And by the way, that first bomb didn't explode on the ground, it exploded in the atmosphere over Hiroshima, exactly with Uranus overhead being dropped by an airplane. And I discovered that I have Uranus exactly overhead over Hiroshima. And I never knew that. What I want to bring up is I have done my chart, my personal chart, so that everybody hears this. By the way, I have this program. It's relocated. You can get 5 relocated charts. You have to choose the cities in different time zones. It's not very expensive. It's like $75. And you get these reports. Now, I've had it for many years. It's a very sophisticated thing, which will then have actually in there your relocated chart with the 4 main asteroids and Chiron, and it gives all this information. So let's say you're born in Los Angeles, and you want to understand what your life would be in New York City, Paris, France, Tokyo, and so on. You can order this thing. Now, your chart is going to change, just like Wayne has had different relocated charts of his, what we call the regular chart that you're used to, the 12 houses and things rising, setting above and below. Here's my point. The map, okay, the map, as Wayne often says, Mark, the map is not the territory. But the point is, what the map does, the world map, which looks like an old thing, it's like a rectangular map, is a two-dimensional representation, and please tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think I am, of a three- and multi-dimensional reality that I believe in the future will be an Earth globe that would be revolving. And one would see all the things that you do so expertly, right? You'll say, Mark, over here, there's this battleship moving through the Straits of Taiwan. That is 35 or whatever degrees north and south. And here's this reason why that's important. What we have is let's say the United States map or my map doesn't change. Now, what does change are the transits to that map or the progressions. Just like with your own chart, everybody listening, you have a natal chart and you have relocation for any place you move to, and you're having transits and progressions. But the point is, your map of the world for the moment of your birth in a particular location, when we do that world map, that is fixed. That is a fixed map of you as a planetary person born in a particular place. For me, it was New York City. But I am an Earth human being more importantly than I am a New York person. And everybody listening, that's why whether you travel or you do business, like if you're born in New York City and you never left the borough of Queens, like where I was born, but you have friends in Sacramento or Tokyo or Delhi, India or Paris, France, and you conduct business or you have a friend or you have a relative, even if you're not living there. Now, if you're living there, then you have that personal experience. Cool, great. You traveled there. You saw the sights. You did whatever you did. You made connections. You started a business. You traveled. You got married there. You had a baby there. All that's well and good. What I'm trying to say, which sort of puts the kibosh on retrogrades and so that we don't fear them, is that we are an Earth entity, and the Earth is part of the solar system, and we also have a heliocentric chart, Michael Erlewine and others in particular, forming this whole thing. Hey, the helio part of ourselves is more of our soul spiritual thing. And in the helio charts for me, what happens is there's no sun because you're using it based on the sun as center, and you have an Earth, and you eliminate the moon. And instead of having 12 houses with degrees of the zodiac, you put everything into an Aries, Taurus, Gemini natural chart, 0 degrees, and you're looking at things from a higher, more universal perspective. So what I honor all of these people, and the Rudgers of the world, and the Michael Erlewines, and the Grant Louis, Eleanor Box, and all these wonderful people that we've learned from, I've learned from. They are always trying to say, this is exciting, and let's not be afraid. And I don't like the fact that this is my dispute. I'm not saying Mercury in reverse doesn't have concerns, but so does every other planet, and they all go retrograde. So let's all equally sort of look at the subject and not, do one thing. So having said all that, Mercury. Well, okay, yeah, but just so that we get into the future here, Mercury will go retrograde on December 29th. Venus and Pluto will come together 2 days later. Pluto is coming back again for the third time. We're not done with any of these things. They are not to be feared. They are to be looked at and looked at from a higher level, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think you said it. I don't think you tried to say it. I think the action that I think you just achieved was to say it. Now, whether people understand, that's a different thing. And, again, you and I are interpreters of a very particular map of reality, set of map of reality tools. It's like a set. It's like if you're a painter and you have your colors on a temple, on a,
right.
You have this selection that you can choose from. Back to the Neptune, back to a retrograde planet. Now, when astrocartography was formulated in the minds of Jim Lewis back in the 1970s, and there were people whose shoulders he stood on, like Firebrace,
Yeah.
an astrologer named Firebrace from World War One. There were other people who were dabbling in it at the same time, the Gary Duncans of the world. And Michael Erlewine was closely aligned with all of these people because he actually had Gary Duncan, and he hosted him up at Matrix Software in Big Rapids, Michigan. But to get to a firsthand experience of a retrograde situation, I have Neptune in my horoscope at 17 Libra, 3 minutes retrograde.
Right.
Now, when I was born, Neptune, just taking Neptune out of the horoscope and saying, if you were aligned around the Earth, where would you have been able to see Neptune with your eye, with a telescope, or with some device? And the places where you would have seen Neptune rise, that means it's on the eastern horizon where the sky meets the Earth, would have been places like Philadelphia, New York, and New Hampshire. The place where Neptune was exactly overhead would be a quarter of a turn of the Earth, exactly overhead, high noon, like the sun rises, and then a quarter of the day later, it's at high noon. Neptune at high noon for me is Berlin, Germany.
Where Neptune was discovered.
Yes, and if you continue another quarter, you get to Southeast Asia and you get to Thailand, and at a place called Udon, Thailand, is where my Neptune was setting. So in that moment, if you were on a phone call with those 3 different locations, they would have said, yeah, we can see Neptune, it's rising. Yeah, we see Neptune, it's exactly overhead. We see Neptune, it's setting. Here's the point. When I was a child, my parents took me across the Atlantic Ocean almost exactly under my Neptune line to live for 4-5 years.
Yeah.
That's Neptune retrograde. I went and lived under a Neptune retrograde line. Now, what Jim Lewis said was the outer planets are very difficult places to go and live. Well, Mark, you're living under a Neptune line.
Yeah.
Okay, you relocate. For some reason, the circumstances that offered themselves to you in your life brought you to the West Coast to operate under your Neptune midheaven, and you are a Sun Pisces. I find that it's exactly right. Okay? And look at the works that you have done here. Now, I don't know, I don't recall from your birth chart whether you have a retrograde Neptune or not.
Yeah, it is.
You do. So here you are living under a Neptune retrograde line, and you have this position about, well, let's not good or bad this thing, folks. Well, I like people to actually tell their story. And, there are all kinds of struggles and complexities and challenges that go on with people living their lives anywhere, anytime.
Well,
and trying to achieve something, know that Earth has got gravity, and life is a fight against gravity. Just the sheer effort to stand up and walk 2 feet as a toddler is, what are you going to call it? Challenging, hurtful, damaged, retrograde. I don't care what you call it. It's something that you do. Children stand up and fall and stand up and fall, and after a while, they're standing and walking and running.
Okay. Well, let me
playing soccer at the World Championship.
Let me bring up
one more loose end to tie. When I was living under my Neptune midheaven line, I was there as a child and as a soldier. And so I saw different things because of my state of development. My maturity allowed me to be at a different phase of my life and experience that Neptune retrograde zone marking the Earth differently. One of my choices as in the military was whether or not I wanted to be stationed at Udon, Thailand. I chose not to. The last Neptune line, which I have not mentioned, is the Neptune beneath the Earth. It runs through a place called Adak Island, Alaska, in the Aleutian Chains, in the middle of no place. there is a listening station for the Army Security Agency, and they were going to station me there. I opted out. This is all before I became astrologically literate. I had no clue. So I'm just saying, Mark, I'm agreeing with you, but sometimes it's lived life that give people the best stories, the best narratives to explain what it's actually like, instead of people saying, well, it's a negative.
Okay.
So,
let me bring up, okay. I want everybody to understand something that I brought up 2 podcasts ago with what we were talking about. No one can have a sun trine Jupiter where Jupiter is direct. It doesn't exist, because the nature of the solar system, this came out of the Magi Society, out of wherever they were, Taiwan, China, or regular China in the 90s. And I learned it from them. And so twice a year, right before Jupiter goes, when Jupiter goes retrograde, a couple of days later, there's a sun trine Jupiter. And before it goes direct, and we just had Jupiter go direct, there's another sun trine Jupiter. If you have sun trine Jupiter and it's exact in your chart, Jupiter is retrograde, okay? You can't make Jupiter have one of the most auspicious alignments. Like, in theory, one would say, wow, one of the great alignments, if you're born with it, the 2 largest celestial bodies.
Yeah.
Let me get this point out. You can't have it. It doesn't exist in any person's chart who ever lived, lives now, or will ever live, as long as the Earth is 93 million miles from the sun. Jupiter has to be retrograde to have one of the best alignments you can ever have. Secondly, when the sun is opposite anything except the moon, and you can't have sun opposite Venus or Mercury because they're between the Earth and the sun. We're going to have sun opposite Mars in 3 days. It's going to happen about an hour and 33 minutes after the full moon. And the sun is opposite Mars. And remember how you brought up, like, we've had 132 Mars returns? Every 2 years, when Mars goes retrograde, there is always a Sun-Mars opposition. And at every Sun-Mars opposition that has ever happened, happening now, or will ever happen, Mars has to be retrograde. You can't make it direct. And also, the sun opposite every asteroid, because the asteroids are beyond Mars, every sun Ceres opposition, Ceres is retrograde. Pallas Athena is retrograde when they're opposite. Every sun Jupiter, we talked this recently. Jupiter was at its closest point to the Earth since 1962, right? Cuban Missile Crisis, sun opposite Jupiter. Jupiter has to be retrograde. Saturn, I'm born when the sun and Saturn are opposite within 3 days after. Saturn's retrograde. The point is that we have all of these retrograding planets. And to call Mercury retrograde or Venus, retrograde, oh, that's bad, that's negative because Venus rules love. And retrograde, even the word is bad. The point is, we should eliminate the word retrograde just like we should eliminate, and Antar Ali did this marvelous job of this in Welcome Planet Earth, and he's still writing for GPS Astrology. A couple of the books he wrote, one in particular, let's get rid of these words. Opposition is a terrible word for planets being 180 degrees apart. Let's call it a polarity. Let's even call it a complementarity. Rudyard kept on saying things like Aries and Libra on the opposite sides of the zodiac should be seen as 2 halves of one whole, like a yin-yang, right? Taurus and Scorpio are really 2 parts of one whole. They appear to be on opposite ends of the zodiac, but in reality, they're kind of a yin and yang. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is you and I talk a lot about, and we are concerned in this kind of thing, not just the individual places on Earth that we are bringing up in this sharing, and I do want to, when we end, I do want to talk about the sports thing about New Year's, just to bring a little bit of, it's not just levity, but some interesting thing about Georgia and Arizona where these games are going to be played with Venus and Pluto, which is just ironic and synchronistic. But I get on my high horse, as you know. The whole point for me is, look, GPS Astrology, which is now the new thing that I've created, didn't know I was going to put a publishing hat on at this late in life, is all based on the idea of goodwill is love in action. All your needs will be met. Like, what are your true needs? Try and figure that out as an individual. Where's your place in the sun? how can you, get out of negativity and feel better? I don't like being part of a field of astrology where the pulse of it in the community and with social networking, with Twitter and things, of some of the things I see, call retrogradation, particularly because of Mercury, when the other planets are not barely mentioned in any of these things. And what's being piled on is, I would use a four-letter word, which I never use. It's bad, it's negative, and we're going in a direction where the younger people, and I have 36 classes that I did years ago, School of Planetary Studies. You can all learn astrology, 1 hour. It's on the website, School of Planetary Studies, at a very low rate. Please get into this stuff where you can learn from the Eleanor Box, the Dane Rudjars, the Mark Edmund Joneses, the Jim Lewises, the Grant Louis, because these are not people. Tell me if what your feelings are. I don't recall almost any of these people writing like, you better be afraid when this is happening because this is really bad. They don't talk about things like that. We're trying to emulate this toward a science and understand the archetypes and themes of planets, sun and moon, alignments, eclipses, these big pictures and everything else from mundane Earth astrology, and how our own charts are cycles that we can use them to do good in the world and not to live a life of fear. So that, again, I have Sun opposite Saturn within a couple of degrees. Traditionally, Saturn was a planet that's said to create fear. By the way, one little point in all this, Dane Rudjar when I got into all this, I was really depressed. I saw where my sun was in Pisces. I had to look up and realize I have a Sagittarius moon. Everything made total sense until I looked at my chart and I started realizing, aside from having a very prominent Jupiter and Mercury rising and the moon above and all these things that look kind of fortuitous, right, in the general scheme of things, wait a minute, I have Sun opposite a Saturn retrograde. And I started reading what we might call the cookbooks at that time. This is back in 1972. And every one of them was like, this is bad, this is negative. All these negativities are going to happen in your life. Saturn opposite the sun, that's not good. Everything was like being written that I read until I read Rudjar. And he's the one who said, every time the sun is opposite any planet, it has to be retrograde. And that's what changed everything, because what I realized is, why am I on Earth? If I've set sun opposite Saturn and it has to be retrograde, and if Saturn does have a lot to do with depression and doubt and worry as its shadow side, because Saturn has wonderful sterling qualities of leadership, executive authority, logic, pragmatism, responsibility. So every planet has positive and negatives. But when I saw the first thing, and I'm reading like, well, there's no way I'm going to be an astrologer if I have sun opposite Saturn. Then Rudjar says, wait a minute, you have a mission in life. You are the sun. You're not necessarily Saturn, although that's part of you, but your role and this is an important concept, everybody. If you have any opposition or polarity in your chart, you can't live in a forest and be a hermit. The more oppositions or polarities, you have to work them out through relationship. You need to either get married, be in business, associate with other people. Okay, Mussolini had a chart which was like everything was in one corner of the chart. He did have a relationship with some people, but that's the chart of potential dictator, at least that Rudjar talked about, and so did some other people, Charles Carter. The reason that a Mussolini could make the trains run on time and create fascism in Italy and make all those people suddenly like go kind of crazy before he was in Adolf Hitler in Germany, who then Adolf Hitler took that and then did the whole thing in Germany from the older Mussolini, was in Mussolini's chart. He just had a very unusual chart. Everything's bunched together. There's no polarities in there, okay, of the basic sun, moon, and planets. They're all in sort of one sector, so that there's no challenges to the person's authority through relationship. And they just like are a steamroller doing whatever they're doing. Back to you.
Well, Mark, look, again, you're speaking from lived experience, and again, we have taken the measure of these maps of reality, these horoscopes, these tools that we use, and the reveals are quite extraordinary. And to give people an understanding of what lessons we've learned approaching these tools and applying them in our own lives. Sometimes, I think of The Graduate and Dustin Hoffman being told plastics, people trying to give him advice about which way his life should go now that he was a college grad. And it's like, at that point, it's a proving ground. Earth is a proving ground. People have to take their own measure. It's nice to have some wise sage, some I Ching crossing the great ocean experience that allows you to find a mentor or a master who can guide you. But in your own way, when you went to Finhorn, in your own way, when you went to Lucius Trust, in your own way, when you affiliated with Michael Erlewine, in your own way, when you had your cookie sessions with Eleanor Bach, you did just that.
Yeah.
And you know that the journey was not an easy one because, Saturn literally in life was your dad, and he was a doctor who wanted you to be a doctor. And so you had the conundrum of conundrums.
Well, let's bring this back. And thank you very much for sharing all that because, Wayne and I, just so you know, just like any two friends and feeling of a brotherly kinship, he has a bunch of brothers. I have sisters. Let's bring this together today because, we're in part 2 and I want to make sure we sort of finish up and go on with our days and so on. But okay. So here's what I want to say here, and then I'll give you the final comment. As today was happening under the Neptune thing, they've already decided for college football that I find this ironic. There will be they've decided instead of 4 teams in 2 years there will be 12 in the playoffs. Okay, right now we have a situation. Georgia's undefeated, Michigan's undefeated, and the other 2 teams they chose is a 1-loss Ohio State, and TCU, Texas Christian, just lost yesterday in a close game. Otherwise, they would have been 12-0 or 13-0. So you got 2 teams. Okay, so here's where I want to go with this. Okay, 2 things, and then see what you think. This I have seen for 50 years in astrology. And this is why Wayne and I are doing this. And you showed me a little picture about sports as a kind of cultural thing. When I got into astrology a long time ago, I started watching that baseball in the World Series was a predictive tool about things. So just to give you an example, when I was 13, in 1963, the Yankees were playing the Dodgers. And the Yankees had been so amazing under, my hero Mickey Mantle, Yogi Berra, and these people in the 60s. And a lot of people out there hate the New York Yankees, but I was born in New York City. So they won all these championships when I was like barely alive, age 1, 2, 3, 4, so in the 50s. But then in 1960, and this is important for what I want to say about these playoffs that are going to happen on New Year's when Venus and Pluto are together, Mercury's retrograde, and Mars starts hitting our Uranus for 3 weeks in a row where it won't let up. So remember where we're going here with watching Georgia play Ohio State and Michigan, TCU, and one other comment. Anyway, back to 1960. There's the Tom Hanks movie where the girls, he's coaching the girls, and somebody starts crying. I forget that movie. And Tom Hanks says in that movie, "There's no crying in baseball," right? You just brought up another line from the movie. There is no crying in baseball. Mickey Mantle cried once. Now, he was injured like in the first World Series, so he was injured really for the rest of his life. But in 1960, the Pittsburgh Pirates, this is important, they're called the Pirates, and the New York Yankees played in the 1960 World Series. I was 10 years old. I remember watching these things. The Yankees, under Whitey Ford, who was an amazing pitcher, he won 2 shutouts, 10-0. This is so emblazoned in my mind, 10-0 and 12-0 against the Pirates. They hardly got a hit. Another guy, Bob Turley, who was a big winner, won a game 16-3. So the Yankees win 3 games in that Pittsburgh series. This is, remember, 1960. This is the month before the election between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon in early October. And the Yankees have won 3 games. It's just ridiculous, a blowout. They're not. The other team isn't scoring. The Pirates win 3 games, like 3-2, 4-3, and 2-1 by 1 run. The Yankees won any of those games, the series is over. They go to the 7th game, one of the most classic games of all time for a 7th game, and it goes 9-9. At one point, Tony Kubek gets injured in the 7th inning when the ball hits a stone at Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, which, they didn't take care of it all that well. They go to the bottom of the 9th inning, 9-9 in the 9th inning. Yogi Berra is no longer catching. They've got Elston Howard, the first black player to come to the Yankees, after Jackie Robinson broke the color line in 47. Elston Howard, who had saved the World Series for the Yankees against Milwaukee in 1958 when they were down 3-1, and they won that series. Now it's 1960, and Bill Mazeroski, a second baseman, comes up and hits a home run over Yogi Berra's head. Probably the most fantastic home run in the history of a whole World Series, and the Yankees lose to Pittsburgh 10-9, and Mickey Mantle cries. Now, a month later, in the tightest election in a long, long time, JFK barely beats Nixon. Fast forward to 1963, just before John F. Kennedy is about to be murdered. We don't know that's going to happen in November. We're in another World Series. The Yankees are playing the Dodgers, who are now in Los Angeles. And the Dodgers win the first 2 games in Los Angeles. They go to Yankee Stadium. This is October 63. And the Yankees lose another game, and they're down 3-0. And Sandy Koufax is pitching, the great Sandy Koufax for the Los Angeles Dodgers. In the bottom of the 7th or 8th inning, Mickey Mantle, who's a switch hitter, hits 1 home run, finally, off of the amazing Sandy Koufax, and the Yankees lose 4-1 to Sandy Koufax and the Dodgers, and I am feeling very depressed in 1963 in October. And then November 22nd happens, and that changes my whole life forever, and I get into astrology about the whole thing and so on. Now, this is all lead in to say, this is way before, look, I'm a little kid. I'm a teenager at that point. I don't know anything about astrology, but what I know is numbers. I know statistics from the World Almanac. They hit me over the head. Why is Mickey Mantle number 7? You know what I mean? All of these different numbers, Yogi Berra number 8, Elston Howard number 32, Tony Kubek number 10, and all these basketball players and football players with their numbers and their statistics and so on. And I love math and science. If I don't have that in my life, and I know you have similar kind of thing, then we don't, because your love of sports and, playing a center, for your team and being captain of your team and everything else, numbers, minutes, timing, teamwork, all this stuff. Without that, we don't become astrologers. So fast forward, even though I love baseball so much, the day that I loved the most was New Year's Day, because there were 4 bowl games. And they would be played, we've talked about this before, on television, at least for me, you couldn't watch both the Cotton Bowl and the Sugar Bowl. Why? Because they were played at the same time. It was like noon. One was in either Dallas, somewhere in Texas, the Cotton Bowl, and the Sugar Bowl was in New Orleans. We had a very clear thing, and these are they were standardized places. Now you've got all these dozens of bowl games, right? The Rose Bowl was always played in Pasadena, and the Orange Bowl was played in Florida, in Miami. There were 4 places. So look, if the University of Miami was in the, Orange Bowl, well, great. But I mean, it didn't happen all the time. And the thing is, you did get a Pacific Coast team at the Rose Bowl, but it could have been Washington Huskies. It wasn't always USC or UCLA, right? In the Cotton Bowl or the Sugar Bowl, it might not be any Texas team or any team from Louisiana. It could be any two teams. But that day was filled with these 4/8. Leads us to now, and that's why I wanted your comments because, you played in college, and this is a big thing. I didn't, although I loved, college football. I didn't play, in that level. We now have something that is so politically weird and synchronistic. So Georgia's undefeated, and they're going to play Ohio State in Georgia. Only because the Peach Bowl, which was planned in advance, was in Atlanta, and it's called the Peach Bowl. Georgia's the Peach State. Well, look, in 2 days, we're going to have Walker versus Warnock to decide the U.S. Senate in Georgia. That's happening with the full moon and the sun opposite Mars retrograde, and we've got Ohio State coming from the northern area to go in Georgia. Well, two things for me. Is that a fair fight? Well, I guess you could have a lot of Ohio State fans, and they're going to give them a certain amount of tickets. But come on, here's the thing. They have to go from Ohio State to travel down to Georgia, whereas the Georgia team is sitting at home. Basically, they don't have to go traveling anywhere. They don't even have to move anywhere except, if the University of Georgia, I think it's somewhere else, maybe it's in Athens, Georgia, so on. What is it? A half an hour, 45 minutes or something. Ohio State, they have to get on a plane, do this whole thing, and that's a disruption. Okay. Meanwhile, Michigan has to go and play Texas Christian in Glendale, Arizona. Once again, we've got these two states that could be part of this whole state legislature thing for the Supreme Court, and these are two places, the key two places that Donald Trump was saying in the last election, hey, the vote is rigged. I should be president. We need to destroy, unend the Constitution. And this is going to be played out on New Year's Eve day at two different times with millions of Americans watching this thing in Georgia and Arizona. I turn it over to you. I find it ironic and synchronistic that sports, once again, is telling us a deeper story about who we are.
Okay, Mark, this morning, this headline appeared online under politics. In Georgia, how sports explain a political battleground. And it's 11:20 a.m. This was published on December 4th, 2022. So this is very hot. This is hot news. This is under that Neptune standing still in the sky. It will still be standing still in the sky on Tuesday when this thing down, the throwdown. But here's the specific language that's quoted in this article. Again, the title being, in Georgia, how sports explain a political battleground.
Right.
And so the response here is, in quotes, sports are a cultural identifier. And in the South, college fandom is a big part of that. So talk about assembling a big crowd, the former president states like the big crowd, and putting on a show. It's like assemble the people, get them all gathered up, and then you do your message. Well, they continue and they say the following. Now, our politics and campaigns are so much about identity, and we've heard that expression, identity politics. Right. And then the last quote is, we see all these overlaps. So what Mark was saying, what you were saying, Mark, about the synchronicities of major sport moments in the United States history and major political moments happen very closely to that event. Here we go again.
Well, you're totally right, and you sort of teed that up to me earlier when I wasn't planning to, I didn't even know who was in the championship, or this will be the semifinals. Just like in the World Cup, they're now getting close. France, England both won today, and so on. We talked about Pele, Lionel Messi, who were born, we're talking about a difference of like 47 years. One guy is 35, the other guy is 82, and for different reasons. And both unbelievable heroes. Like you said, Pele is like the athlete of the 20th century of all sports. Now, Babe Ruth might be saying something about that too from the 20s, the curse of the Bambino, both between Boston and New York. But let's look, I'm more than happy from a worldly standpoint to say it's Pele. You know what I mean? Babe Ruth did have a pretty major influence on America's pastime for a while.
Listen, Mark, there's more. Listen, this is diabolical because it's being played in Georgia, and guess who has his campaign office, had his headquarters set up at the University of Georgia?
I don't know, Donald Trump?
Herschel Walker. Walker.
And he played for Georgia. He played for Georgia. Yeah, that's why he's running. That's the whole thing. Look.
There's a museum of Herschel Walker's football success at the University of Georgia, and here's what they say: great politics, a great place to campaign, said Governor Brian Kemp, a University of Georgia alumnus. And they go on to, and you're getting all these fans, and you're getting these people. The interest is there. People know who's going to the game. I guess the turnout's going to be pretty good.
Well, again, we just watched the, Houston Astros and, from part of your hometown, although it's not necessarily Illinois, but where you lived a long time, Philadelphia. Every World Series that, whether I watch it or I don't, depending on the teams. I mean, I'm always tuning in. At this point, I don't like the emotional turmoil in sort of my stomach when I'm too attached, right, at this point. And I feel very grateful that I wasn't, experiencing a lot of championships in New York. I want to go back to the Los Angeles Dodgers beating the Yankees 4 games in a row. Years later, the Yankees turned the tables, on the Dodgers several times. And then 1981, when Reagan became president, it was a shortened season, by the way, in baseball, and the Dodgers beat the Yankees that year. So they've had that whole rivalry from Brooklyn and New York, and for many years. I mean, the Dodgers never won anything until 1955. We could go on and on, which we have to end. But what I wanted to say here was the one other World Series, because of the 1962 series, particularly because we've talked about this before privately. We may have mentioned it briefly. But the Yankees were playing San Francisco Giants, and it was October of 1962. And it literally rained in San Francisco as they were about to play the last 2 games. And the last game was this 1-0 game that the Yankees barely won, with Willie Mays and Jesus Alou, I guess, on second and third, with 2 outs, and Willie McCovey hitting this unbelievable line drive that Bobby Richardson, second baseman, just happened to be exactly positioned. And if he wasn't in that spot, the San Francisco Giants in 1962 would have won that game 2-1 in the bottom of the 9th inning. And by the way, what was so amazing was the synchronicity that literally that was the day in the White House that they brought over the films that had been taken the day or two before. And you've shared a lot of other things about the Cuban Missile Crisis and photography. But that's when the 13 days began. So I would say of all the World Series, the Pittsburgh Pirates-New York thing was interesting because the Nixon-Kennedy election was so close and was considered potentially stolen by the Kennedy family about Illinois, that particular state where Mayor Daley was pulling strings, and then Lyndon Johnson in Texas. Those were the 2 states. And, we know that Nixon had the opportunity to challenge it, and he did not. Okay, this is part of history. Somebody said, you know what? You could make a whole furor over this and, try and get – he didn't do that. To his positive morality at the time, rather than what we see now with Donald Trump with this constant unending thing, I've been cheated and so on. By the way, the word that he uses more than anything else, this is important from an astrological viewpoint. Donald Trump has, regardless of his sun in Gemini, moon in Sagittarius, is born in a total lunar eclipse, Venus conjunct Saturn in Cancer, Mars rising in Leo. He has 4 celestial bodies in Libra. He has more Libra than anywhere else. And he has Chiron stationary in Libra with Juno. They're both on the United States Saturn exact. He has Neptune. He has Neptune in Libra. And the word that he uses more than anywhere else is the Libra word, I am being treated unfairly, which is the motto of Fox News, fair and balanced. I have watched this over and over again. I dare anybody to come up with another word in his lexicon. And this is the thing that riles up MAGA, Q, Proud Boys, and so on. Because in their own personal lives, and again, just to bring this up, if my dad were alive, and I don't know how, I know there are some former veterans who turned the tide and they've decided to go against, whatever. But the insurrection to potentially destroy, and I was watching the significance of the Capitol also esoterically, the Capitol building that was designed in that spot from Washington and Adams and Jefferson and all those people. The Capitol is at a key point, and you probably know this as well. When the esoterics of designing Washington, D.C., the logistics, the energy field, the Capitol building, and how it's created is not just the place where they meet for the joint sessions and the whole thing. It is a spiritual center in the country that the founding fathers, mothers, and people all connecting up to spiritual reality of all kinds of things that is not Christian, it's not Judaic, it's not Islamic, it's not Buddhist. We could call it deist, whatever. These are people who believe in divinity, but a divinity that had sort of created the whole universe, and life as we know it. And that's in John F. Kennedy's inaugural, like his address. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forward to lead the land we love, asking his blessing, meaning at least for him, God, asking his blessing and his strength, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. Now, where he got those words, I don't know. He was a wordsmith. He was a writer, when England slept, Profiles in Courage. Now, maybe he had help with doing those things. He was very articulate. That's the only speech he gave, because he wasn't reelected. Those words were things that carried me forward in college after he died. And I had put them into one of my books, a hardcover book at school. And I would look at that all the time. So that's why I remember it now. I'm not looking at it now. I just remember it because I remember that whole part of it, because it was like, wait a minute, we cannot be a theocracy. That's not who we are. And to see that Israel could become that, or we might fall into that through suddenly it has to be some kind of version of Christianity, we're a melting pot. That's the whole purpose of what the United States is. We can't lose that. As terrible as some of the things we've done as a country with armaments and everything else, and slavery and Native American culture, whatever we've done, which we can all study, the United States is an experiment in something that is different from all other countries, at least for the most part. And even Ronald Reagan said that. And I'm not in agreement with him on almost everything. But, to be an American, or to be able to call yourself an American, you can't do it in other places. Look at what's happening with Russia or with China. And there's these stories right now. Ray from the FBI, we're concerned, and I read this morning, China has sort of these quasi-police departments in dozens of countries that are sort of hidden away, and they're trying to say, no, we're not doing it. Well, why does our FBI director now has brought it up 2 or 3 times? So we've got a lot of stuff going on in our country under cover, shall we say, and let's just hope, fingers crossed, between the Supreme Court, what Donald Trump brought up this weekend, the Neptune station, all these other cycles, through sports and everything else, that we get through this time and that we're okay as we get into 2023. So that's my final hope. Please share your closing again and any other words and so on, so that we bring this epic sharing of 2 parts to a close for today.
Mark, that rock that was on the field that caused the ball to bounce?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Suppose I can get hold of that rock for my collection?
It's somewhere. I don't know. That was hit Tony Kubek in the throat and changed that whole World Series. Otherwise, the Yankees would have won.
Yeah, that would be a great rock to have. Well, that's a great talisman there. All I have to say to close is, folks, find your place, seize the time, and live your life as art.
Well, thank you so much. Again, we're sort of flying by the seat of our pants. In the astrological stratosphere. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll be back again with another Out of Bounds sometime soon. The full moon is coming up. If you get to hear it, this podcast and on YouTube should be available. And whether you hear it before the full moon, there's a lot of stuff coming up. And do try and listen to this and the previous ones. And again, GPS Astrology, which now has 2 issues. You can read that at Great Bear Enterprises with an S.com. You can read both of the previous issues and subscribe, and it doesn't cost anything. So love and blessing, everybody. And again, Brother Wayne, thanks for sharing, and we'll be doing this again. So everybody out there, have a wonderful couple of weeks and good holidays and a good new year.